Okay, in this unit, Unit 5, we're going to talk about writing goals in your gap analysis project. Recall our class whiteboard when we last met in Hawaii, and there's quite a bit going on this whiteboard, but notice that we started at the very top with the mission, and then we talked about the GG, or the global goal, that we might have benchmarked, which is right next to the GG. We might have benchmarked that against other competitors or other standards. And then once we had that global goal, we then talked about the concept of cascading goals, cascading down from the global goals all the way to daily performance goals, which we characterized as current, concrete, and challenging. So in between the global goal and these daily performance goals, we have these cascading goals. And we started talking about these cascading goals within two frameworks: an educational framework as semesters and curriculum, and in businesses and other performance organization of just about any type. What Clark and Estes called these was cascading, but some people have adopted the term intermediate goals. So we're going to talk about this today in a little bit of detail. I just wanted to show you what we started with at the end of our class to refresh your memory, activate your prior knowledge, if you will, and then move on to a more formal conversation about this. So in this unit, you should be able to do a number of things by the end of this unit. Describe the Clark and Estes concept of cascading goals, analyze your problem of practice to identify your organizational goal and the stakeholders who have direct involvement in achieving the organizational goal. You should be able to write the goals for the stakeholders, and you are going to choose the top three stakeholders, the ones who have the highest participation in achieving the organizational goal. Although there may be many, you're going to just choose three to make this project manageable. And then you should be able to describe the idea of what a critical behavior is versus a competency. Critical behaviors are things that people do as a result of things that they know how to do and know what they are. So in other words, you need knowledge, skills, and attitudes, such as competencies, to be able to perform a behavior. And you want to write three critical behaviors for each stakeholder, or two or three is fine. And then select which stakeholder is going to be the focus of your project, because again, we need to make this gap analysis project manageable. And then you're going to describe how the stakeholder goal will be measured and the gap, and then write the gap analysis questions just by following the template and the format. Okay, let's talk about some creating goals, the big ideas about creating goals. So as we've seen, all goals cascade from the organizational global goal. Organizational global goals have to align with the mission of the organization. You could have several global goals that originate from the mission of an organization. So we are going to be generating our global goal based on the problem of practice, or your problem statement that you created earlier, as an example of one global goal that may exist among many with an organization. So we'll call this global or organizational goal for this particular problem. The two, for the purposes of this paper, are the same. Okay. All goals have to align with the goal above it. We talked about that with the cascading goals. All goals are measurable, and goals are normally written or generated based upon these three dimensions: who is going to do what, by when, and then by how much. In other words, it has to be measurable. So there's three levels of goals. So here's a table called the 3 levels of goals that shows you a little bit more organized the scope of each goal: global, cascading, performance, and in educational settings, the time needed to learn, and in other settings it might be the time needed to achieve, and then the purpose or function of it, and then an example of how they might be used. So take a look at this table and notice that the global is broad and cascading or moderate, and we are not going to be concerned about performance goals, daily performance goals that are C3 or concrete, currently, and challenging, because there would be too many of them. So we're going to stay on the cascading goal level, and this is the level that we can then design and plan interventions to solve various stakeholders' gaps that may exist in achieving their stakeholder goals. The next slide here actually is an excerpt from your template for the gap analysis project. And as you can see, this slide has the mission on it, the organizational goal, the stakeholder goals, and the critical behaviors. And what you want to do is use this then as your guide in actually completing your table here of the organizational and stakeholder goals. You can use the examples. You could either delete the examples or just push the examples down and create yours in the same columns in the same cells, so you can compare it against this example, and hopefully that serves then as a guide. So let's go to the next slide of setting goals. So how do you do this? How do you go about doing this? Well, you used a performance problem you identified in your organization. You identified a global goal by saying that this organization has a problem of this, and then ask yourself what goal would be achieved if this problem were solved by the organization. And then you want to go through and think about each of the stakeholders that have direct influence on achieving this organizational goal and identify those. So keep in mind, again, in global goals, you want to keep in mind the justification for the standard you use in terms of measuring your global goal. And you want to keep in mind that the global goals are aligned with the mission, and that the goals in the organization that you may be using, that's you're creating as a fictitious, although you may be using a real organization, you may actually want to use those goals. Okay, so after setting a global goal then that is aligned with the mission of the organization, this global, again, meaning the same thing as organizational goal on your table in the template for the gap analysis, then you want to identify stakeholders, just 3 stakeholders, and think about the top 3 that have the most influence on achieving the organizational goal. And you want to then think about which one of the 3 has the most influence, because that one stakeholder is most likely going to be your stakeholder of focus when you go to write up the text after you have your goals table approved by me. So the next 3 slides here are samples of goals. They're samples of global or organizational goal. Again, we are using the words synonymously here. And then it gives examples of stakeholders, just 2 stakeholders in these cases, because I ran out of room on the slides. 2 stakeholders and what their goals would be. So notice again, the test is the stakeholders must achieve these goals in order for the organization to achieve its organizational goal. And so that's how they have to align. You hear this word a lot, and I keep emphasizing it, but that's one of the keys. So when you finish creating your goals table in your template, you probably want to see if one of your colleagues would look at it and see if it's under a peer review, see if it actually then corresponds with the instructions here that we've been talking about. Does the global or organizational goal reflect the mission? Are there at least 3 stakeholders identified in your table? And do all the goals have the language of who does what, by when, and how much, so it's measurable? And are all the intermediate goals aligned with the global goal? So it's your turn. Email me with any questions, or even better, when you've written a draft of this in your template, then notify me and I will take a look at it and give you some feedback.